Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Ryan Aber, joined by Jason Kersey. Jason, tough week last week for Sooner fans, but given the overall scope of what happened in college football that day, there's some encouraging things that can be taken away from it.
Yeah, I don't think that it's devastating for OU. I mean, TCU's a good team. It was on the road. It's a conference game. I think that the OU can certainly recover from this. This isn't completely detrimental to their national championship hopes, but it doesn't help either, and especially if TCU finds a way to beat Baylor this weekend. I think if that happens, OU's in real trouble of missing the college football playoff.
Yeah, definitely, and that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. I think before the season, I don't know that anybody thought that this would be a huge game nationally, Texas and OU, but I think a lot of us thought that it certainly would be the biggest game in the conference this weekend. That's not the case. It's at least the second best game in the conference, at least the third best game in Texas, with Ole Miss and Texas A&M playing in College Station this week, and with TCU is playing at Baylor. Just a different kind of feel going into this Red River Showdown.
You know, the entire Bob Stoops era, I think you and I both have been around OU football to some degree for a long time now, and it was always, this was the weekend. This was the weekend that many times would make or break OU's season and Texas's season. Now, there were obviously times when Texas lost the game but won the Big 12 or went to the Big 12 championship and vice versa. But so many times this was a top 5, top 10 game. College Game Day was there. It was, it was the biggest game in the country this weekend, and now it's the third biggest game in the state of Texas and the second biggest game in the Big 12. It's unbelievable, and we're not rooting for OU or for Texas, but you certainly would like to see this game get back to where it belongs because it's such a cool atmosphere, it's such a neat rivalry, and it's a shame that it's sort of fallen off like this.
And I thought Bob Stoops on Monday brought up something interesting and something that I don't know that I really contemplated that deeply, is that how the dynamic of this rivalry has changed with the Big 12 the way it is now, with one 10-team league instead of the two 6-team divisions. This game doesn't quite mean what it did as far as winning a conference championship and all the other implications around it.
No, it doesn't, because now, if OU lost to Kansas State in the past, they could recover from that if they beat Texas. And now if they lose to Kansas State but beat Texas, they could still be at risk of not, winning the conference title. It's very interesting in that way too. I thought that was a good point he brought up as well. In a way, I like the league where everybody plays everybody, but it's
one true champion.
Don't even get me started. I don't know what you're trying to do with that, but I do miss the days when there were divisions. I think the divisions were fun, and I think it heightened the importance around OU Texas. However, if there were divisions today and there were 2 more teams, it would still be the second biggest game in the Big 12 South because
right,
you'd have
TCU and Baylor would still be in the same division, so it would still carry that weight. Going back a little bit to last week and also looking forward, what was the most concerning thing to you about what happened Saturday? Not just the 37-33 result, but what led to that?
I think it was the offensive struggles in the second half. And the reason I think that is because, we saw the defense struggle some against West Virginia, but they came out of halftime and seemed to fix some of that. And they did the same thing against TCU. The defense seemed to fix some of their problems in the second half. But the difference was this time the offense just couldn't do anything after halftime. And some of that is play calling, I think. Some of that is a word that I heard way too many times yesterday, and I'm ashamed that I'm using it now, but execution. So, I think that's the biggest concern. Against West Virginia, OU came out of halftime and decided we're going to just pound it with Pirine, and it worked. And this time they did that on the first drive, and it worked, and then they just went away from it, and that's baffling to me. I don't understand why they why they made those decisions.
And they did it for a stretch against West Virginia as well. Perine was doing really well. It was clear that he was the guy who was making a difference for them when he got the ball on the ground. And it is baffling that 2 games in a row, one, it didn't wind up being as big a factor because Perine was able to get the ball at the end of the game and help them put that game away. But 2 games in a row to go away from a guy who's been very consistent with being able to move the ball on the ground and make things happen is just stunning to me. And, I think a lot of times we sort of tap the brakes on the fire Josh Heupel and the criticism of Josh Heupel, and we're not saying that at all, but it just makes you scratch your head. And a year ago in this Red River Showdown game, all of us thought, you wrote, that possibly the way to beat Texas was to use a mobile quarterback and run the ball with the quarterback, and they didn't do it at all.
No. I still – that is still one of the most baffling moments of my time on the OU beat was, against Baylor, they were way overmatched in that game, at least on that night. And, it's not really surprising that they lost that game the way they did. I think that there were some problems with the offensive maybe game plan and play calling. But against Texas, it was just so bad. And because entering that game, Texas had one of the worst rush defenses in the country, and they were just getting destroyed by running quarterbacks. Taysom Hill, Bo Wallace, even Sam Richardson had some success running the ball for Iowa State against them, and OU didn't even try it. And I know Blake Bell is not the most mobile of quarterbacks, but I think even he could have had some success running the ball against Texas if they would have tried. But the other thing is they had Trevor Knight just sitting there on the sideline healthy and didn't even try it, and that was unbelievable to me. So, and this year I think that Texas has a good defense, but I think they could maybe have some success doing some of the same things if they'll just do it.
Yeah, and that'll be interesting to watch on Saturday to see how OU's offense goes about challenging Texas defense, because Texas defense played really well against Baylor. I mean, you look at that 28-7, and I think even 28 on its face is impressive because of what Baylor's offense is being able to do. But you look, Bryce Petty, what do you have, 11 completions? Is that right, something like that?
Yeah.
Not many at all. 2 of their touchdowns came on a punt return, and was it a defensive touch? I can't remember. But only two of their touchdowns really were created by the offense, and that's eye-opening given what Baylor has done the last couple of years in this league.
Yeah, I mean, Texas's defense isn't a problem, and if OU doesn't attack them the right way, they could be in real trouble. I mean, I don't think that this game is a gimme at all. I'm picking OU to win, but I don't think that it's a gimme at all.
Yeah, and I'm picking OU to win too. I think I said 35-24. I think it's a game there's gonna be a little bit of scoring in it, but it's gonna go down to the wire. I don't think it's gonna go down to the last minute with that score, but I think into the fourth quarter this game's gonna be competitive. I think in the end Texas's depth gets them a little bit as OU starts to wear them down, but this is gonna be a close game throughout. How do you see it playing out?
Well, I think that I could see a couple different things. I mean, I could see it being kind of the way the last couple games have been, where it's close in the first half, and then maybe OU finds a way to get going a little bit in the second. But I could see OU getting up early, taking an early lead, and then Texas maybe clawing back because they have such a good defense. I don't really know how. My final score, I think that I'm going to pick in the paper is I think 27-14. I think that's about how it's going to be. We saw it last year. I picked this game to be 63-17, and that was miserably bad. So I don't pretend to know what I'm talking about on predictions.
Usually we save this to the end of the week, but given the state of things right now, I thought it'd be interesting to do it right now. Which player on OU has the most to prove on Saturday going into this one?
Trevor Knight. I don't know that there's any doubt about that. him and Zach Sanchez are the two that I would go with. Those are two guys that are supposed to be the two of the better players on the team, and they have not looked like it the last couple of games, particularly in Sanchez's case. But Knight coming off 14 of 35, I think that Knight has the most to prove, and we'll see if he's able to do it.
Yeah, I agree on both of those. I think Sanchez, to me, with the level of performance that people have expected of him, he's obviously put in, big interception numbers all throughout the year until last week. But to look back, and you and I both looked at the third down plays yesterday defensively, and to see how many times that TCU went Sanchez's way on big third downs, and how many chances he had to make plays on third downs, and how those didn't wind up coming out in OU's favor, was a little bit eye-opening.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Sanchez has got a lot to prove. He's got a lot to improve on, and I wonder how much the shoulder's bothering him. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot that he's got to do better, and it's not going to get any easier. And
time to go off the track a little bit, Jason. Sunday morning, we're still in our hotel in Fort Worth, and we see the polls come out, particularly the coaches poll. And I know we both raised a stink about this on Twitter a little bit, but you see TCU, an undefeated TCU team who beat OU the day before, be ranked behind a one-loss OU team, and say it was close, say it was at home, all that stuff. But the fact is, an undefeated team versus a one-loss team, there weren't any grand extenuating circumstances. There wasn't any great player missing who's going to be back for OU this week, all of that stuff. To see that was absolutely ridiculous. And then to see Michigan State, who got beat by Oregon, who got beat by Arizona, and to see in the order in the poll, Michigan State, Oregon, Arizona. Arizona has no losses. They haven't had any really impressive wins out of that side of that Oregon. They've struggled with some teams they should have beat pretty badly. But still, they won on the field, and they won on the field on the road. Then Oregon, whose only loss is to Arizona and who beat Michigan State, and the Michigan State at the top.
Yeah,
we've talked about this quite a bit this year as we're driving to places and just around. But the absurdity of some of those ranking decisions, and it's not just one or two coaches, it's enough to make a difference in the final polls. And I know the polls don't matter at this point. How ridiculous is it?
Well, it's it's outrageous is what it is. And it's outrageous to think that this poll was a third of the formula in determining the national championship matchup for the last several years. I've always found rankings to just be ridiculous in certain spots. You look at, I remember in 2011, Oregon was, I believe they had two losses. One of them was to LSU. They played LSU out of conference in the opener. Stanford lost to Oregon straight up, and Oregon won the Pac-12. But Stanford, with one loss to Oregon, was ranked above Oregon with two losses, but one of them was to LSU, and Oregon was the conference champion. And in those rankings, Stanford was ranked ahead of Oregon. And if you just take the top four that year and assume that that's the playoff, Stanford would have gotten in above Oregon. And Oregon beat them and won the Pac-12. And we've talked before, and I give all credit to you for changing the way I view rankings, because for a long time I've been obviously a fan of football and college football for years, and I would notice little things like that, but I never really started to sink into how crazy things are until I started reading your blogs when you were on the high school beat and you were ranking the classes. And a lot of times, if number one Jinx would beat number 3 Owasso really badly, you would not sometimes not drop Owasso in the ranking. Or if Owasso played a particularly close game against Jinx, you might bump them up to number 2. And you explain that by saying, I had them ranked above them for a reason. Why would I drop them? I thought they were going to win. I'd love to hear you expound on that a little bit for our listeners.
when I got into this rankings thing, and I thought about it following college rankings forever, but when I started ranking high school teams, it just hit me. Why in the world do we penalize teams for losing to teams above them, like Oklahoma State and Florida State earlier this
Perfect
year?
example.
I mean, to think that what we thought we knew about OSU was that they came into this game with not very little experience left. They would probably get blown out. Jameis Winston would have a huge night. Florida State would win this game by 40. That didn't happen. The game was close until late, so why not reevaluate things from number 1 to number 25 and think, what do we now think about this Oklahoma State team? Well, they're better, so let's move them up, even though they lost.
They weren't even ranked going into that game,
Absolutely.
so put them in the rankings.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just use every week as a new piece to your puzzle to put the complete picture together and throw out, because maybe last week I didn't have a full picture of this because this team hadn't played anyone, or this team, the head-to-head matchups work out better. But don't be locked in what you had preseason week 1 when you're on week 6. You've got these 6 weeks of things to look at. Use them and reevaluate things every week to week with the complete picture of what you have. And I'd sort of dismiss this idea of we shouldn't have preseason polls and everything, because I think they do serve a purpose. I get people talking about college football. People get fired up about it. You think about what you know about these teams. But when you marry yourself to what you thought in the preseason, that's detrimental to things. And again, I know that these polls don't have the same weight that they once did. Certainly the committee, I don't believe, is going to use them as a big piece of their puzzle, if any at all. But if you're going to take the time to do the exercise, do it right.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing.
Well, to me, frankly, comes off as lazy. It comes off as, well, that team lost, so I'm just going to drop them down.
It's a whole lot easier to rank 25 when you just look at the week and look at what you had and don't think about anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, somebody said, I think on Twitter, can't remember where I saw this, on Twitter, maybe it was somebody I'm friends with on Facebook, said they were so mad that TCU, they thought it was wrong that TCU would go from 25 to 12 in the coaches poll, or 25 to 9 or whatever they are in the AP poll. And my question is, why? What, just because these arbitrary polls had them at 25, they proved that they're a damn good team. So why do you have to abide by what you had before? Well, we don't want to raise them too much. We got to move them to 18, or we got to move them to 17. Yeah. No, put them at 9 if that's where they belong.
Yeah, that line of thought, it's unbelievable to me that anybody carries that line of thought. Going into Saturday's game, here's what we knew about TCU. We knew they'd beaten Samford. We knew they'd beaten SMU, a horrific team. Nobody would argue any different. We knew they'd beat Minnesota. Minnesota's probably a middle-of-the-pack Big Ten team, but they're a Big Ten team, and the Big Ten is down. So based on that, based on what we knew about Trevon Boykin's improvement, you put him at 25. Completely valid in my mind. Then they go out and beat Oklahoma. And yes, Oklahoma had issues in that game, and there's plenty of things that they have to correct. And by the end of the season, there's a good chance that Oklahoma is a better football team than TCU. But the fact is they only play once, and this was settled on the field. TCU beat Oklahoma. Now you take that into consideration. You have Oklahoma, anywhere from 10 to 13 generally. TCU deserves to be above that right now.
Yeah, and definitely. And the other issue that I have with the coaches poll in particular, and I also need to say, I don't think that the AP poll was really a problem. I think that was generally right. I don't like that Florida State's number 1. I think that sort of comes back to this mindset that we have to put them up there because they won it last year, because they've been number 1. But at least in the AP poll, there's transparency. At least every one of those voters, their ballot is online, and anybody can go search for it. The coaches are not held accountable in the same way, and that's not right. They only have to release their ballot publicly one time, and it's at the end of the year before the bowls. They don't even have to release the post-bowl ballot. Now, that's outrageous that there's no transparency there, because you have people like Bob Stoops and Mike Gundy voting. Nobody knows what they're doing. I mean, and they could be affecting. They could be trying to tilt things in favor of their conference, in favor of whatever.
And with the lack of transparency, how can you blame them? If they want, I mean, obviously we'd get fired up about it if we found out about it and everybody would be talking about it. But at the same time, if the ballot is kept secret, why in the world wouldn't you try to push your line of thinking and your conferences? I don't know. Don't want to say agenda because that word gets thrown around entirely too much in the sports world, in politics, all of that stuff. But push your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it encourages that. It gives you no reason not to do it. And if everyone else is doing it, well, then why not? I mean, because that's the thing. Bob Stoops could vote OU number one, and we would never know. I guess you'd know the vote you had.
There's one
if
vote,
you had a number one, okay, he could vote him number two, and we would never know. And that's not right, and that needs to change. Again, we both know that these polls are relatively meaningless, but in terms of determining the playoff field. At the same time, if you're going to do it right. Otherwise, don't do it. Otherwise, it's a waste of time.
Absolutely. And some poor soul has Baylor ranked number one in the coaches poll, which to me is absolutely ridiculous given what they played, their result on Saturday. They won, yes. They won by 21, yes. But to look at what teams that are below them, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Mississippi State, look at what those teams have done and still have them behind them. Is absurd.
The thing is, that could be a Big 12 coach. It could be Briles. I don't know. Does he have a vote?
I'm not sure what.
It could be a Big 12 coach. I mean, we just don't know, and that's the problem. So I'm glad that we talked about this because it's one of those conversations that we have on the road when we're traveling together. And I think this week on the way back from Fort Worth, we said, we should talk about this on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something that's been sort of eating at me, and I know you for a while, and it's just still absurd to me. And sorry we had to get off on a little bit of a rant there, but sometimes it's good to talk about the bigger picture in college football and some of those issues. And Art Briles, by the way, does have a vote.
Oh, sure.
5 Big 12 coaches have votes: Art Briles, Mike Gundy, Gary Patterson, Bob Stoops, and Charlie Strong.
Interesting.
And I would be stunned if one of those 5 wasn't the one who voted Baylor number one.
Yeah, it has to be. And if you're Art Briles, I mean, who can blame him? Why not?
Absolutely. Because by the time your vote gets released, you're going to have a better idea. You're going to have a really good idea of where Baylor is. So you're either going to be joined by a lot of company, or you don't have to even admit that you voted them number one, all 2 months ago. So that's all the time we have for today. We could be talking about this and so many other things for hours, but we'll let it go on that note. Check us out every day at newsok.com and every morning at the Oklahoman for the best OU coverage anywhere.